So a lot of Western analysts who are, on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, a lot of these analysts keep insisting that for Russia, the May 9th date, Victory Day, is a very important deadline for them. That the Russians want to achieve certain outcomes in the war in Ukraine by May 9th. And if they don't achieve those outcomes, then it's a failure, that the Russians are losing if they don't achieve these outcomes. And right now, the conventional wisdom in a lot of nooks and crannies of the internet analysis world, the military analysts, is that the Russians' failure to win the Battle of the Donbass, which is going on right now, by May 9th, which these analysts assure us will not happen, well, that signals that the Russians are losing. Which is just the most bizarre thing. I mean, think about it. See, they're saying that the Russians' failure to achieve complete victory by a date that's a little over a week away, or less than a week away, rather, shows that they're losing, but they are going to win. I mean, they are going to achieve victory in this battle, right? So they're not losing, they're winning. It's just taking them a little more time than this arbitrary deadline that has been set by these analysts. And you see the point. You see, a lot of the analysts, I've noticed, look at the war in Ukraine from the American point of view. They lack the empathy to put themselves in the shoes of Russian generals, Russian political leadership, Russian soldiers, and understand the war from their point of view. Because, like I've said from the very beginning, the Russians' original aim was never to destroy Ukraine. They never wanted to destroy Ukraine. Why would they? It's a sister culture. And there are a whole bunch of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. They don't want to harm them. Of course not. The Americans, when they go to war, yeah, sure, they just blow up everything. They blow up the electrical grid, cell phone towers, the water supply, everything. They just blow up everything because they don't care. But the Russians do care. They care a lot. And that's why from the very beginning, they were very careful about not hurting civilian infrastructure. I mean, do keep in mind, only over the last few weeks, couple of weeks, last a little bit over 10 days, I would suppose, that the Russians have finally started hitting the train stations of the Western Ukraine to stop the flow of weapons from the west to the east. And the war has been going on for, 10 weeks. They could have done this on the first day, blowing up the train tracks and whatever, of the switching stations and all the rest of the train infrastructure, the rail infrastructure. They could have done that in the first day, but they didn't. Why? Because they don't want to destroy the civilian infrastructure, i.e. they have radically different objectives than the objectives of these armchair analysts in the United States. These armchair analysts who are on Twitter, these Twitter analysts who don't know anything, quite frankly. And so there you start to realize the difference between people who are actually doing stuff and have actual power, like the Russians, and these Twitter observers, who most of whom don't know what they're talking about. They simply do not understand what's going on. And think of it in this Battle of the Donbass that's happening right now. These Twitter analysts say that if the Russians don't win convincingly and conclusively by May 9th, then the whole battle was a loss for the Russians somehow. But from the Russian point of view, they're thinking to themselves, well, we got the Ukrainian armed forces pretty much surrounded on three sides. And this is an artillery battle. And what we are doing is that we are shelling these positions relentlessly, just grinding them down before we send our own troops in. And so we, Russians, are keeping our casualties very, very low. We are inflicting enormous damage on the Ukrainian armed forces, but our casualties are very low because of our artillery approach, of this slow, methodical, grinding approach. The Russians aren't thinking about deadlines. The Russians aren't thinking of making a big splashy announcement during the May 9th parade in Moscow, because that's not a priority for them. Their priority is to win with the minimum loss of Russian soldiers' lives. And that obviously ought to be the priority of any political leader, of any military leader, to win with as little loss of life as possible. And if unfortunately the enemy is going to suffer casualties, that's a tragedy, but better the enemy than your own guys. I mean, that's the motto of every armed force throughout history. And so the Russians, they don't care about May 9th. They don't care about making a big announcement. That's something that Americans care about. And here you see the difference in mentality. The Americans would be happy to sacrifice the lives of their own troops on potentially suicidal attacks in order to achieve a fleeting victory by a certain date. They would do that. In fact, they have done that. Whereas the Russians would never in their wildest dreams think it's worth sacrificing even one Russian soldier in order to have a victory by a certain date so as to make a big announcement. I mean, think of May 9th. May 9th is Victory Day, the day that the Red Army defeated Nazi Germany. May 1st is May Day, the biggest holiday of the communist regime. You would have thought that back in 1945, they'd be very interested in achieving victory over the Germans by May Day, May 1st. But they didn't worry about it. Because what's more important is achieving a solid victory with as minimal loss of life as possible. And so that's why there's May Day on May 1st and Victory Day, May 9th, 8 days later. Because the Soviets decided that they weren't going to sacrifice soldiers in order to have its weird PR victory. And that is the problem with the mentality of the Twitter analysts. They are looking at the war from the point of view of the Americans and not from the priorities of the Russians. The Americans care about stupid PR victories. The Russians do not. The Russians care about minimization of loss of life, and especially minimization of the loss of life of Russian soldiers. That's their priority. They don't care about PR. And see, this, it seems to me, shows the fundamental weakness of the Americans. They care about superficialities. They don't care about reality. Think about it.